recording, Shane, just so you know.
Darn. I flipped the light on.
Okay.
Good. I was going to say something else.
Heading to an 80s disco bar.
Disco bar. Ouch.
That
was?
Like, wow. Dark pants, dark shirt, white skinny tie. It's not terribly skinny.
I dress in the dark is really what
Is that what it is?
yeah.
Can't turn the light on.
Sorry, you can't.
That's okay. I was
Check that out. And look at the things and tell me what you think. But
Yes, we are.
you're kind of the guinea pig here. So.
No, I didn't.
If you're comfortable sitting there,
There went Shane.
honestly, if you're more comfortable, we can move my computer.
I'm Shane.
I guess I'm the guinea pig.
So we can have you wearing it, everybody laughs at you, we don't have to run.
Exactly. And everybody's off the hook.
What do you need? I've got one.
Oh, that is an extra pen.
It's a stylus separate.
Oh, that's perfect, thank you.
Like the mouse and the arrows. See the way, which click, right and left, is that right?
I know. You need this so badly.
Okay, yeah. So you know I have to have the computer.
Ready?
So I can see
I feel stressed because we just came from another thing. I haven't had a chance to.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to welcome you out to our special city council meeting this evening. Appreciate, is it evening still? It's 5, maybe it's late afternoon, I don't know the official. But we appreciate everyone being here. The purpose of this special meeting is to discuss our LTAP report and receive a Public Works presentation. Shane, do you want to give the official introduction and give a little brief background on what's brought us to this point?
Sure. We did want to start with the LTAP, and we have Nick from. Do you work for Utah State University? Is that your employer? Is
Utah
that
State
okay?
University,
All right.
yes.
So I'm sure he has really good things to say as an Aggie. We only go for the best there. And we commissioned this report several months ago. We talked about it in our May meeting when we talked about roads. And I think what this does is gives us a nice independent look at our community. I think we all have our thoughts about roads, the concerns we have, which ones are good, which ones are not. I think this will take an unbiased look at that and tell us what kind of what the status of our roads are, and then they also make some recommendations for fixing those. And after Nick concludes, so we obviously can have him ask him a bunch of questions and do that, but we have Josh following up with him on some specifics about our roads. He's asked you to look at some, and I think that'll be a good exercise in kind of giving us a priority for going out to bid and some of the projects we have lined up for this summer. So I'd say, Mayor, if it's okay with you, we turn the time over to Nick and have him give his presentation.
Sounds great.
All right, thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here this evening. Just a little background. I've done a lot of engineering over the years, 33 years at Provo City, and I was a post engineer over in Germany with the military too for a while. So been around, and then I've been up at Utah State with the LTAP program for about 7-8 years now. So I'm kind of bleed engineering, as a matter of fact. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit. I don't know how much time we got, 3 or 4 hours. I'm guessing it's not appropriate. We'll try and get done in about 10 or 15 minutes if that works out. Okay, I want to talk about, we did do an evaluation of your streets, all of them. Every single section has a part in the report. And basically we have put it together and given you the information and prioritized a lot of that stuff, so we'll go through it here. Historically, pavement management has been doing the worst first, the ones that get the most acclamation. You know, you want to get rid of those calls if you can quickly, and so as a matter of fact, you start putting those first. Unfortunately, or politics, sometimes I would guess your neighbors might say, hey, how about doing our road first, kind of a thing, and that's historically how it's kind of happened. Pavement deterioration. Essentially, what happens to your asphalt is you've got sun. The ultraviolet rays will cook the asphalt, the actual oil that kind of keeps the rocks together. And in the summertime, that's what you get. In the rainy season, you get water penetration. It starts filtering down into your asphalt, and eventually, if it gets through the asphalt layer and gets into that base course, gravel base course, that gets muddy and mushy, and boom, you've got a pothole happening pretty quickly after that. Temperature and moisture, these are kind of the enemies of asphalt, and so what we want to talk about a little bit of how this all works. Deterioration. Basically, one loaded truck is worth about 500 cars. So it does as much damage as 500 cars, and so generally speaking, when you look at your road system, you want to see where your heavy trucks are, and basically those are the roads that are probably going to need to be the most structurally thick and strong. And as you get down into the local road areas in the neighborhoods, you end up with very light loads, light traffic volumes as a general rule, and they don't take as much abuse as the big ones. Probably the biggest enemy to your pavements are trenching. And it just used to irritate me something terrible to go ahead and put a new asphalt road in or put in a new overlay on it and find out that somebody's going to cut it the next day or next week or next month. You take about 5 years of life when you do that, and we don't want to do that. What happens if you kind of, it doesn't look like, we got a pointer there. You've got, essentially, what happens, you may not see it, but once you open up a trench, the lateral pressure starts pushing in on the soil, and it starts loosening it up underneath the edges of your asphalt. And so what it looks like afterwards is this, and you've probably seen some of those as you've driven your roads. So the idea is we're trying to preserve the roads rather than reconstruct them. And I'll show you a table of the cost, basically the cost of each age of road and the treatments we've got to do, and it'll talk about. So doing the bad roads first is a very expensive way to run your system. Okay, what you want to do is start sealing your roads at this point. Okay, you don't want to wait till it gets down to this point because at that point you've got water down into the base course material and you're digging it up and starting all over again with that kind of stuff. It's very expensive. So here's a cost, a table of the cost of pavement deterioration. Okay, basically a road will last you when it's new about 20 years, and sometimes if you've got bench areas, it's a little less because you have more snow and moisture up in those areas. If you're down by a lake, for example, you're going to have a little bit different down there because you've got underground water issues you've got to deal with. But the first 75% of the life, you only get about a 30% of quality drop. It's that last 25% that kills you. And so what the idea is, for each dollar you spend up in this 75%, it's going to cost you $10 if you let it go a little too long. Okay, so the idea is we're trying to stay up in this category as much as we can, and every time you get down to this point, you want to bump it up with a seal coat of some sort or another, and that's basically what this program has helped you do. This is kind of a graph of the remaining service life. Okay, You got a 20 years of remaining service life. That's a new road right there. Here's a junker that has almost nothing left. And basically what we've done in the report is categorized every section of road in town into one of those categories, and you can kind of see the spread of your system. Luckily, you don't have a lot down in this area. These are the $28, $30 a square yard fixes right there, okay? These are only $3 or $4 fixes per square yard. See, that's a big difference, and so what you're trying to do is keep many of these up in this newer realm, and then when it gets down into here, you overlay it, or you put a seal coat on it and bump it back up here, and just keep bumping them back. And you don't want right here, this is a little bit concerning. You got 20% or thereabouts, a little higher than that. That is in the 6-year realm, so this little lump's going to hit you pretty hard, pretty quick, and those basically have to rebuild at $28 a square foot. Or we'll show you some ways to do that without being quite as expensive. So ideally what you want is no more than 3% in your remaining service life in the 0 category that's failed. Okay, your average should be between 10 and 12, and that's a healthy system. Here's what you have currently. You've got less than that 3%. You've only got 0.2% in the terminal service, which is the remaining service life 0. That's a little lower right here. You've got one little area of that that's going to start haunting you pretty quickly, and those are the things we need to kind of talk about. This is a lot of information, and I don't know if you can see that. That's pretty tiny. This is a chart with that we look at. You can see all the different types of treatments. Okay, these are your cold patches, fog coats. If you're going to, and it's kind of hard to see, but you're just in under $1 a square yard to do those. Okay, if you let them go a little bit farther, then you end up in this realm where you have microsurfacing or some of those treatments there, and you'll notice that the cost, and you can't quite see that, goes up, pretty well. You're getting up into the $5-6 a realm, and then if you wait until you get down into this area in your deterioration curve on a particular road, you're starting to get into some very, very expensive things. And of course, if you let it go until it's 20 years then you're $30 a yard versus 3. So it's a big difference. And what you're trying to do is keep that road in that area. Okay, so remaining service life in 2021, if you did not do anything to your road system, you're going to see a lot of these bump over here into these very, very expensive fixes. Okay, and obviously you don't want to do that. That's why we're meeting tonight, to make sure you get your system in functional order and keep those in the cheaper realm. Okay, this is a road with 2 years of life left out of the 20. Okay, you can see it's pretty alligator. What you're going to have to do on these roads is just dig it up and rebuild it, at least in spots, if not the whole thing, if it looked like that. Here's one that's about halfway through its life. It still looks pretty good. You don't see much distress. You see one or two. You see maybe a little crack over there on one of the passes, but you can see it's grayed out, and what's happening is that oil is starting to boil or bake out of your mixes, and so it's not black anymore. The oil's being evaporated out, so it starts to get brittle at that point. Okay, here's a cost of construction costs. This is out of UDOT. You can see, and this is kind of hard to read, but here 2003 it was about an index of 1. And here we are in 2016, it's an index of 2.2, so the cost of your road maintenance has gone up 2.2 times in that period of time. How much has your road money toward your roads been increased is the issue. Probably not much. We got a bump this year with your B&C money, your gas tax money, and that's usually where most cities get their funding for their road system. But inflation of the funds, it loses basically more than half in 13 years, and so it's not easy to stay up with. Okay, so if you stay with this current allocation of 1.1 million, this is what your system will look like in 2023. Okay, you're going to have about 17, I think that's 12% will be in the destroyed category, which is the $28 a square yard if you've got to fix it. Okay. Here's a recommended program. The first 3 or 4 or 5 years, if you want to get all your roads and keep them in good shape, it's going to be about 2.9 million. That's a lot of money. You're allocating less than half of that right now towards your roads. Okay. Here's the 2016 through 19. You're talking about 2.9, and then a couple years, 3 years after that, it goes up to 3 million a year. But after you get those roads out of the danger category, you'll notice how it goes down, and then that way you can live with a much leaner budget, and it's not going to cost quite so much. But getting those roads that have deteriorated to a point where they're starting to get very expensive is what we're trying to do at this point. Okay, all roads aren't equal. You'll take a look at these major highways. Those have more traffic on them. Those are obviously the ones you want to spend a lot of time and effort on first. Okay, these smaller roads, residential roads, they can wait a little bit. There's not as much damage to them because they don't have as many heavy trucks on them, that kind of things. And so you want to focus on your major collectors. You got about 4.5% of your mileage is in that realm. Okay, you've got minor collectors, 11%. So if all you did, and if all the money you had, you want to spend it if you can on those roads, those big, heavier volume roads. Okay, local roads into your neighborhood areas about 84%. And if you don't have money to cover it all, at least get the big ones done first. Those are the important ones. Here essentially is your allocation right now. You get, or last year, your B&C, everybody know what the B&C allocation is. It's your, the A roads are state roads, B roads are county roads, and C roads are city roads, okay? And that's from the gas tax, that's how it's allocated out. And so last year you had about 954,000, almost 55,000. And this year, so far, you've got 1,028,000, but you'll get more as you should get about a 25% bump in the money you get because the gas taxes are finally coming into your coffers. Okay.
Is it based on a calendar year or a fiscal year?
Basically, this is a fiscal year that we've got here. Okay, so we got about a quarter of the year left out there. So in 2017, this is what the roads need if you can do with them all. Okay, here's what they need in 2020. And then after you've got some of these big roads and the big volumes of these roads chiseled down, it goes down to a far more economical area of 1.6 million and then below. So hopefully you understand crack sealing is very important. Okay, what happens if you let a crack propagate all the way through the asphalt layer, and usually most of your roads are about 3 or 4 inches of asphalt. Once that crack gets all the way down and it penetrates into that base, turns it to mud, and as soon as a heavy wheel goes over it, that's where you get destruction of your potholes. Okay, so hopefully you've got a crack sealing program that's vital and going well. Okay, Here's some, before you do these roads, as you find the alligator areas of your road, you're going to have to cut them out and replace them, like this particular one, okay? Get those out, and then you can seal coat your roads. Don't do it over the bad sections of alligator breakage on the road in those areas. Fog seals in the first 5 years of its life, 15 years of remaining service life up to 20. Fog seals are a good approach. It keeps it volatile. It keeps it lubricated so it doesn't dry out on you. There's various ones. Here's an emulsion of the high mineral content asphalt. There's about 5 or 6 different distributors out there that have a little bit different recipe on their asphalt, but they're all good, and they're only about 50, 60 cents a square yard to do. It'll give you an additional 3 or 4 years of life. Okay. Then if you get down into the halfway point of your road, slurry seals are a good option. Okay, slurry seals are basically just a mix of aggregate, latex fibers, stuff like that, and it goes in and seals off the surface, fills in your cracks. It's a very liquid material, and I don't know if that's what you use in your system at this point. I'm guessing most cities use that, and it's a very effective one, and it's not terribly expensive either. It's about $2 a square yard. Chip seals. Chances are you're not real excited about chip seals. In Cache Valley, every one of the roads, every one of the cities uses chip seals. The ladies then send their kids out to play on the road, and before you know it, they got road rash all over them. However, they got that through, and they'd say, well, just don't send your kids out on the road. And they get away with chip seals. Chip seal actually is one of the best ones you can do. You get about 7 years of life out of it, and it's not that expensive. If you can do that, and if you've got outlying areas, a chip seal is a good way to do it. If you can get them into your subdivision areas, that's pretty tough along the front here. Cape seals, that's one where you have a chip seal, and then you put a slurry seal over the top of it to smooth it, so you don't have these rough rocks out there. That's a possibility. Okay, here's a cape seal on one side, a slurry on the other, and you kind of see the difference in the strength as the cracks propagate on the slurry side fairly quickly, but not as much on the cape seal. Okay, chip seals and cape seals and thin overlays. Thin overlays are usually about an inch and a half. Okay, of asphalt put on top of your surfaces, and that's when you get probably 7 to 8 years life of remaining service life on your road. That's when you'll start putting those on. Flexible microsurfacing. I don't know if you use that yet. It is a very, very, very good new treatment. Usually, you'll notice UDOT uses it on their roads, and it evens out. It's actually got Portland cement mixed into it, so it fills the divots and makes a very smooth road. These are good for your arterial and collector roads, and it's only about $3.60-70 a square yard. Versus, again, a rebuild at $30 a square yard, okay? Bonded wearing courses, that's another one you might want to consider. It's a machine called a paver machine. Is different in it's a spray paver, and you'll notice what it does is it sprays this emulsion right in front of your lay down your screed. And when that hot asphalt of 300 degrees hit it, it sucks it up and gets a really great bond in there, and it's not that expensive. So that's a possibility. If your road gets way out of the realm of pleasant anymore, and you have to rebuild it, full depth reclamation is the way to go. And in full depth reclamation, what they do is they grind maybe the 3 or 4 inches of asphalt, and with the base of about 2-inch base, grind it up well, Then they come back and spread on either asphalt emulsion or a cement mixture. And then they compact that, and then they put an overlay on the top of that, a new surface on the top of that. And you can do that for about half of what if you have to dig it out and send it where your stockpiles are. It's a lot cheaper option than digging it out and rebuilding, which a lot of agencies have done. Here's the chart again. This is a little bit hard to read because it's kind of a little far away. But that's basically, you want to stay in that yellow band if you can, and you want to stay in the top part of that yellow band with those seal coat treatments, okay? Here's Kaysville. You'll have a GIS-based system that they can kind of keep track of it with. Every single section of road will have all this information on it, so that for example, counts, lengths, widths, all that kind of stuff, traffic counts. So you can kind of tell which roads are, if you have that information, you can kind of keep it in one spot, okay? So, updated records of your pavement condition. This is one of the benefits of the preservation system. A budget allocation, you know how much you're supposed to do. And here's one, for example. Here's a section of road where it's down at the eighth level. They put in I can't see that exactly, an overlay. You get another 7 years of life on it, and then it starts to deteriorate over a period of 5 or 7 years. And here's another one, slurry seal, put it up there. And that's the way you do your maintenance to make sure you get the best out of what you've got. And essentially, that is our presentation. You've got a whole book full of every road in town that kind of tells you what to do. Hopefully you use it and start allocating these very, very carefully so that you can save as much money as possible. Recognizing, I want to let you know, most cities and towns have lost about at least 2/3 of their buying capacity over the last 20 years. Okay, there's just, you don't get the funds. They come in the same, but the cost increase. And that basically putting everybody in a real hurt. One possible option is what did in Provo City, and they created what they call a road utility, just like a water utility. On the road utility, they decided how much each individual house contributed with traffic, for example, so they'll pay maybe $2 or $3 a month on that. And then if it's a bigger establishment, a store, for example, they're going to generate so much traffic, they pay quite a bit more a month. On that kind of stuff. That is one, I think that's probably, I know there's 4 or 5 other cities that are going that way now because the funds have decreased in value so fast over the last 15 years or thereabouts that's probably one of the better ways to go, and you might want to consider that. So with that, any questions or comments that you have that you'd like to have discussed? Okay, go ahead.
Just one question. So it appears that the cost of road reconstruction and maintenance has gone up quite a bit faster than the general rate of inflation. Why is that?
Tax increases just aren't real popular, and generally speaking, they hesitate to do that because they get a clamor from the public, and they just haven't done it and haven't kept up. Originally, that money you get out of the B&C fund was supposed to be for collector and arterial streets, and it kind of eventually turned into we'll use it where we want type of a thing. So it's basically been the tool for all your roads, but it does not have enough money in there to do that.
So that makes sense on the revenue side, but on the cost side, with the actual costs of paying the contractors to redo the roads, I mean, the revenue side makes sense. I'm just wondering why the costs of road maintenance and reconstruction have gone up so much faster than the general rate of inflation.
Well, generally, you'll have, for example, asphalt oil and stuff has gone up significantly. The costs of labor and that kind of stuff goes up as time goes on. And you add all that together, and that's why the cost goes up, and it does, and your revenues just don't stay up with it. That's the problem.
Okay. Thank you.
It sounds like the LTAP has a software program for managing the pavement, right?
Yes.
And all the streets, not just a 3-ring binder.
We do, and it's free, and we're just updating it for the latest Microsoft system, you know. Should be done hopefully by the end of this month again, and we can just send you that or have you download that and into your system if you want to use that. That way when your crews go out and do something on a specific road or a section of road, you can put it in and keep track of where it is for several years in advance.
Right, and I imagine, as your report indicated, that only is as good as the information that's being updated into it. So, you know, I guess maybe, Josh, this may be a question for you. Who would be the one managing that software and running that so that we keep that up to date over time?
So that would fall under the street foreman. Right now, we have a GIS system that's updated and maintained, and he has access to that. We have several people that feed into that. I believe the program's called TAMS.
TAMS, yeah, Transportation Asset Management
Is it
System.
a standalone program? Does it correlate at all with GIS information?
Yeah, it should be able to go right into your system, and it shouldn't be a problem. Again, we're updating that from the latest Microsoft. They keep updating, so we have to keep updating. But that'll probably, we're hoping to have that finished up in a couple, 3 weeks. So whatever machine you've got or part of Microsoft should be able to work it.
Does that give us a license to, is that just a single machine? Can we put it on multiple?
You can put it on it as many as you want.
So one thing that I have thought of in talking with other public works professionals is they often employ either seasonal or like student intern employment, and on a every other year basis they're conducting these similar types of surveys where what you're doing is you go on the roads and for your time here in the city, you're out on a continual basis every other year evaluating that similar to what they've done this summer. So that's something that right now I don't think we have the manpower to throw at that as consistently as we want. But as we grow and our ability expands, that's kind of where I'd like to see it go.
Yeah, just a question. I noticed that you had the cost analysis on that table of if we did your plan, what it'd be, for the various years. Do we have a table there that tells us if we don't increase our spending and we just use the C money that comes in, what the cost is going to be 10 years down the road and 20 years down the road?
Yes, you can. You can do that, and that's kind of scary.
Well, I think that's what we need to be seeing,
So yes, it does do that, and you can manipulate it, and as you get familiar with it and whatnot, I think that's probably good too.
From looking at the report, it seems like there's similar information, but I don't think there's anything that specifically addresses kind of like those tables you were talking about. It says, if you maintain this level of funding, this is what's going to happen. They had some that were similar, saying if you didn't do anything, it had nothing to do with funding. It was just zero activity. I think that's what it was referring to, was this is what's going to happen.
Yeah, so I think the point is you could back into it, but it could be more visible when you look at those charts and say, okay, here's what it would be like with no maintenance in 2021. Here's what it would be like in 2026, and then these costs. You can back into it pretty easily and figure, okay, if I have 46% of my roads with an RSL of 3 years or less, I'm into it $30, $30 a square yard for 46% of my roads within 9 years.
No, that's right.
And in 4 years, I'm at a third. Because I remember when I read through it, what would it be? A third. In 4 years, a third of your roads are three-year RSL or less. You're talking a lot of money.
But you know, I think the important issue is that the people of Kaysville need to understand this process as well, because it's going to impact them. And, you know, there's a lot of people that, you know, nobody wants to spend money or have increased expenses. But I think if people are educated, I think maybe they're more likely to understand that an investment now is going to save you a ton of money down the long run. And I guess that'd be something to have at our disposal to educate the public.
You know, and when we were trying to go through this and this has been 5 or 6, 7, 8, actually 8 years ago when I was with Provo, we actually went out to every neighborhood area and said, this is what's going to happen, this is how you do with it. And we went and we had like 29 or 30 neighborhood areas, you know. And it took us, 3 or 4 months to do that, to get through them all. But once they got to understand that if they just let it go, it's going to cost more in the long run. And generally speaking, when they passed a bond or two, and that's not a good way to go because you just get behind more on those. They did pass a bond or two $10 million bonds, and that worked out okay. The only trouble is you got to pay the bond and you got to pay the interest, and then you have less money down the road. And so I think if they understand that, and sometimes it takes basically go out and talk to people about it, and people pretty well understand that if they don't do it, they're going to be driving on some pretty poor roads eventually, you know.
However, you do have low interest rates for a little while longer if Janet Yellen doesn't raise them up too fast. And because you have inflation, as we've already mentioned, you can pretty much break even at super low interest rates on bonding. And one thing that's very interesting, if you go to, and I'd be interested in how other cities have done this, you mentioned the extra utility and a fee per house or per business, which is an interesting grounding or collateral or whatever for bonding, because you need to do a lot of work right now and you're in the range of $3 million. But it was interesting that after the third year, it drops down to about $1.6 million. And when you have your 25% increase in B&C road funds coming in, you're at $1.25 million. So you're almost there in your maintenance range after 3 years. So you can't quite pay it back with that, so the council still needs to deal with how you're going to make up the shortfall, but it is encouraging at least that you're pretty close, to that. If you're within $400,000 a year, that's not a huge fee, that's not huge, but you do have to service, if you do some bonding now, you would have to service that going forward and calculate that in, but you're not increasing the cost by bonding by the full amount of the interest rate and the bonding costs, because you've got inflationary pressures, and not to mention that if you don't do it now, now you're many multiples more than bonding if you don't do the work now.
That's correct.
I think in talking with members of the council, for whatever reason, a lot of it is budgetary, but there's been a lot of Band-Aid type reaction. As you're saying, doing the worst roads first. I think bonding, I don't love the idea because, yeah, you're paying for it in the future, but it is a nice way to try and get out in front of some of those bad spots that we have in town. So it's not a long-range solution, but it gives us that jump start to try and get a handle on things, here in this old part of town, a couple places out west. The people in Kaysville, a lot of people are upset with the roads. I don't blame them. There's places that are in horrible shape, but it does cost money, and things come up almost out of nowhere. 30 East is a good example. Wasn't even on our radar until this fall, and it has just exploded. So I like the idea of potentially bonding, as well as exercising the thought of additional revenue sources, wherever those might be. So
You probably all realize this, but just to maybe reiterate, when you bond, usually for you pledge your Class C income as that source. And so if you have 1.25 million coming in and you bond, then you're using that money to pay for it, so you have less to put on the roads from the source. Does that make sense? Unless you have an outside source, unless we raise taxes and use that money to pay for the bond, that you still have that decreased amount of Class C available for roads.
I've got a handout that talks a little bit about various preservation plans of what we can do to, whether it's a 20-year pavement life, 30, 50-year, whatever it is that we're trying to go with, as well as options of funding, maintaining what we currently have, bonding and additional revenue. So if I can pass that out.
I guess the only question would be, if you don't bond, how do you, excuse me,
No.
Councilor Kimberly, if you don't bond, how do you handle the bubble? Because you don't want to raise your fees up to handle those first 3 years and then have more than you need. So I guess what the question would be, what would be the alternative?
And just a thought, when Josh and I and Andy have met and talked about this, I think ideally it would be an outside source of revenue that meets that bond. Whether that's raising taxes, whether that's the road fee that Nick mentioned. To be able to have that 1.25 million, and then in addition to that, whatever bonding, if we bonded for a short period of time, to try and hit that $3 million mark or $2 million mark, and then go back down to where we are. Maybe it's just a short-term solution for a problem, but I don't know. I don't know what your feelings are on the road fee, and I think we ought to talk about that eventually, but maybe we still have more questions for Nick.
Well, and also just from what you were telling us, if we try to put it off, it's going to be costing us a lot more anyway, and it'd probably be more than the interest on the bond, is what I'm hearing. So
Potentially,
Anyway.
yeah.
So
It's,
with the presentation that we've received from LTAP, and I know we were anticipating some council discussion, did you, Josh, have your own kind of separate presentation that you wanted to kind of
no, not a
guide the
separate
council?
presentation, just in conjunction with.
Okay.
But do you have more information or other things to say, or?
Depending on where I was just planning on following the discussion.
Because I believe one of the things that we'd like to see here is some consensus on the roads. I mean, for one, I'd like to hear from Josh what he would like to see us do this year, and maybe even in next year, and maybe even in year 5. And I would like you to know that, because I think there are some discrepancies in what your feelings are about which roads are the most deserving of treatment this year, and there's a varied amount of treatments that are available to us. So that's kind of what I was hoping to get from Josh, was maybe some specifics.
Why don't you give us that perspective from your department, and then we'll...
If you'll go to the second page, the projects list, this is semi-prioritized and semi-not prioritized. These are some of the bad spots, as Nick talks about, that we're currently facing as a city. And some of them are targets of opportunity where I feel like the pavement is in prime position for a chip seal or some sort of slurry seal. So these are the roads that we've identified as needing attention here within the next 3, 4, or 5 years. Up at the top, you see 5th East, 3rd East. Those are roads that don't look so high. I don't know if you guys had a chance to drive those. So there's 2 different types of failure in looking at LTAP and also some of the AASHTO guidelines. There's structural and there's functional failure. So functional would be, it looks bad, it's a rough ride, there's been a lot of trenches cut into it. Structural is the fatigue alligator cracking, where, like Mutton Hollow is structurally failed, but it hasn't functionally failed. It's really smooth. It's a good ride, but it's trying to find a balance between those two. What is the priority of the council? What do you guys feel like we want to go after? So 5th East, 3rd East, 50 West, a small portion. Shepherd Lane isn't a full replace. It's one of these rehabilitation, a mill and overlay. So we're coming in and milling off the surface and repaving a couple inches there. Yeah, but I don't know if you want me to read every single one there, but.
I just have a question, the way
Yeah.
the report is structured. So there's a list of everything from maintenance on the 10 to 14 to even 20-year crack seal, and then you move down to preventative maintenance, and then
Right.
you move to rehab, and then you move to complete reconstruction, and there's some in each category, not too many yet in the complete reconstruction. Do the dollar figures, the 2.9 million first year, 3.3 million, are those, or in the first phase, second phase, are those assuming that you would perform all of these that are on the list? Is that where the dollar figure comes from?
No.
Okay.
It's, I did not acknowledge Matt. He's one of the guys, our graduate students that helped collect all the information. But go ahead and answer that, Matt.
So in the report, it says towards the end, how much of a percentage of rehabilitation, how much reconstruction you're going to do for those 3 phases. And so those percentages are the percent of the network of all your roads. So you only have to do 6 or 8% to get the quality that you're looking for.
Right, but these tables, like table 17, table next one, they're not all the roads, obviously. They're just a portion of the roads that, table 18, preventative maintenance recommendations. So these are just a few of the roads, and only, in some cases, particular sections.
Correct.
From 2. So is this more limited schedule, not all the roads, but, this more limited schedule, is it fair to say that if you were to extrapolate the costs of doing what's recommended in each of the tables, that would equal the recommended expenditure amounts?
Correct. So
Okay.
the way that it's structured is I tried to find the roads that were in that RSL that would get the most from those treatments, thank you. And I ordered it by the functionality. So if you have major roads, I would do those first and then working our way down. The total area is what the 6% is trying to represent.
Thank you.
So back to this projects list, what we're kind of looking for from the council is, we've got the bad roads, and the best thing to do with those is full replacement in portions, but also what can we do to, just replace those portions or get them through for a little while until a bond or additional funding, and follow LTAP's advice and focus more on roads that we haven't lost yet, roads that, we can still bump up that pavement performance curve and get more bang for our buck that way, while still recognizing that these are roads that need attention at some point. So.
What about maintenance? Every spring, I didn't do my drive until this afternoon, but I passed some of your maintenance guys down on Shepherd Lane, and I see them out there just trying to fill every small one. What do you anticipate for major issues and needing for, I know that probably depends on the winter.
Yeah, so this has been a tough winter, and it's been tough on the roads. And we've had crews out doing cold patch since early January, almost full time when it's not snowing. And the snow plows and continual freeze and thaw is blowing out most of the cold patch just as fast as we can put it down. And in some cases, it's continuing to get worse. But ad nauseum, I keep coming back to 5th East. As we're out plowing on the radio, there's kind of a joke of, well, at least it's snowing, the potholes can fill up with snow. I don't mean that to sound cavalier. It's a real and serious issue, but yeah, the roads in some places are doing great, and roads in other places are not doing great. And I'm kind of wondering the philosophy of where does this council find priority between functional and structural integrity. They're both important. I think it's hard to say one over the other is the priority, but.
Well, I guess from my perspective, I take, a cost perspective, but also there's a second variable that's very important, and that is the one that you mentioned about you do your major arteries first. So if you could combine those two and that's what I like about this, is it takes the politics out of it of, clearly Fifth East, and I did have a chance to drive all the roads, but clearly Fifth East is, in my mind, was the worst one, and probably sections of 50 West. And all of the roads are in need of, they're in that lower half of the RSL, of their lifespan, obviously. But I think any decisions that are significantly more expensive, I mean, there's some latitude to make decisions other than just scientific, but I think if you take a scientific approach, where would we, if we're spending our money here, and that's why I was favoring bonding too, because if you spend a lot now and get a lot of these projects on these lists done now, in the long run, you're going to pay way less in your Class B and C road funds or whatever utility or other mechanism you set up to continue to maintain the roads is going to be less expensive in the long run. So that's what I favor, and it has the added benefit of when you go to each neighborhood and you're doing the work and you're explaining it from the political perspective so that everyone understands why we're doing this, even on a street-by-street basis. By having this tool and by maintaining it, you're able to make that case. Now, as far as engineering of, structural versus, what was the other one?
Functional.
I guess a lot would depend on cost, and not only the cost of doing the roads, but if functionally a road is in such bad repair that it's going to cause people to have to get alignment and wear out their tires faster and all that, then that's, so I think you got to look at the whole picture of cost too, and so you could, in that realm, maybe make a decision a little more cost for the city if functionally it's, your residents are going to have to pay a cost out of their pockets because you didn't do a functional repair.
Exactly. I think the term structural and functional makes it sound like structural is far worse. That's got to be the priority, but that's not the case. There's expenses to residents, to the city, even on equipment, things like that. So, like I said, Mutton Hollow structurally failed. Shepherd Lane is a good example of something that is functionally failing. So,
when you look at these, Josh, do you take into consideration, or I'm sure you do, obviously traffic counts for sure, and that's been discussed, but speed limits, there's a gentleman who I'm aware of has bought a brand new car, and on Sunset Drive blew a strut out on it already, and it was a nice car, and sport suspension and whatnot. So he took it back 2 months later, took a hit on it, and bought a Jeep Grand Cherokee. True story. So it's not meant to invoke emotion or shame anything, but so we got higher speed limits on roads like that, versus like the Mutton Hollow. And then we've got differences of how far those roads are already improved. I drove all the route that you had talked about, and you can see each and every little need on each one, and then I objectively try to scope out and look, okay, what do these roads have that others don't? Are they completely widened out to the full right-of-way spec already? Do they have curb and gutter? Do they have proper drainage? The LTAP drainage report is excellent, and the photos in there that show how the degradation of the roads begin when you don't have the proper drainage, the proper crown, curb and gutter, collection boxes, things of that nature. So that's something I'd like to see that we take into account also is, yeah, the asphalt might be worse in some areas, or it might be to the brittle stage like we talked about in some other areas more, but what are the speed limits, and what do those roads already have infrastructure-wise that others are lacking? So
that's one of the nice things about LTAP. So in the appendices, it gives These tables like 17, 18, et cetera, those are just glimpses, examples of what's in the appendices. The appendices go through every single road, and they give the classification. Is it a major collector, minor collector, arterial, et cetera, residential? So with those, like Nick's saying, priority needs to go to these major roads, collectors, major and minor.
Do you know which ones on this list that you provided are major or minor arterials?
Yeah, let's see, major, obviously 200 North, Main Street, I think Crestwood is either a major or a minor collector. Sunset, I think, is a major collector. I think
Probably
Shepherd
Shepherd.
is a major collector, and Fifth East is I think a minor collector.
What, arterial, what's the difference between a major arterial and a major collector?
So, I'm trying to remember my transportation
I've heard
class
all
from
this before
college,
too.
so. So, let's see here. The arterial feeds into like an interstate, is that correct? And then major collectors feed into arterials.
Okay.
And minor collectors feed into major collectors.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Did I say that right?
So arterials would be higher level than collectors? Major, minor,
Yeah, so,
major, minor.
Second North would actually be an arterial
Okay.
on there, so.
One question on this, when you look at the different tables, and maybe it's just because I wasn't looking at close enough that there's, segments or each segment, but it appears that there might be some overlap. So in other words, one section of road appears in more than one table.
Yeah, so that's I'm curious for your professional take. So yeah, there's a little bit of piecemealing in there. We're building a GIS map with the full appendices data there. I've got one here that shows tables, I think 17, 18, and 19. The different colors are different treatments. So on one street, you've got 3 different treatments. Maybe that makes sense, and maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's a target of opportunity. If we're here, do we just go for the whole shebang while we're here, or?
So in other words, if you're doing a roto-mill and overlay, when you finish that, why not fog coat it or something like that? Is that what you're saying, or why
Well,
not?
no, so let's say you've got a section where, this needs to be replaced here, but this section needs a mill and
Oh, yeah.
overlay.
Like 50
So-
West is a good example of that, where it just varies depending on what section of the road
Yeah,
you're on.
yeah, so, is it cost beneficial to the city to say, yeah, this piece here could be milled and do an overlay, or it could benefit from a chip seal, but is there, 2 pieces on either side of it that need to be replaced, and do we just take the whole thing at the same time? So there has to be an evaluation and a discussion that takes place.
Like
Situation.
Third East has a spot kind of in the middle that is just completely blown up.
Right.
Like horrifically blown
Yeah.
up.
And then
So,
you've-
but then you go north and south of it, and, beyond the gutter strips, and they're not quite as bad. So yeah, like a
Right.
different application for those, maybe you have a crew that comes through the entire city and does this application, and then a crew that comes through and does the other application. But yeah, it's a good cost beneficial way to look at it, Josh.
And in similar manner, the water line. So if you have a water line that needs to be replaced, then a lot of times if the road's bad, not the worst, but it's just good practice to do it as well.
Yeah, so one of those projects is Market and Borough. It could survive longer, but we're going to tear that road completely apart. So why patch it and kind of puzzle piece it together when we can get 2 birds with 1 stone? And in talking with Dean, we've also talked about that as, can water, which is the cause of repairs or going in and upgrading something, can that bear some of the cost? And I don't know what the dollar limit might be or what other limitations might be there, but that's a possibility of sharing some of that financial burden, which you know, with the limited money in roads, with no revenue really generated other than tax dollars, it's appealing to me.
It's Nick, right?
Yes.
That's what I was hoping to ask you, Nick, and get your professional opinion on of 35 years of what he's getting at. You know, where funds are kind of locked up for certain things, you know, storm drain funds, culinary funds, secondary funds, and all that nature. But I've spoken with an engineer of several other cities, and they've been able to find creative ways to, you know, 100% within the confines of those restrictions. For example, use storm drain funds to apply to some curb and gutter applications, because that's a storm drain appurtenance when we go in and look at these road projects. So we've got, you know, about 1.25 million-ish, you know, if we stay to the schedule and stay the course. But how much money can we add to that absolutely, you know, correctly, justifiably, by saying, okay, and like what Josh is saying about the culinary fund, you know, we go in and we pay to saw cut, we pay to excavate those trenches out, we haul off that asphalt, unless you bring in a mill, which typically, you know, percentage of that is maybe half and half, that you'd mill that or just excavate it out, haul it off. So you pay for that too. Whereas if we just came in and milled it, came in, anyway, enough on that. But the point is, have you seen that in your career?
Yes.
As a very functional tool that we could maybe actually be talking about 1.6, 1.7, 1.8 million without the bonding and the tax increase, and then maybe bond for, you know, and if we're going to bond for an additional 2 million, and then we find an additional 600,000 in other funds, you know, then we actually take your phase 1 of 2017 plan even further. So
Yeah, I think that's valid. Any way you can do that. Incidentally, just so you know, we've broken it down to block sections generally, okay? Generally, I think when Josh does a project, he's going to do a full road, like it might be 6 or 7 blocks long. Just because, you know, bringing a contractor on site is going to cost some money. And so I'm guessing, and even though maybe each one of those segments show a different treatment or slightly different treatment, I think you can find one that actually fits all of them pretty well. And so you've got to use some engineering judgment as you do this, and I think Josh has got a good handle on that. I don't think that's going to be a problem, but you got, obviously you're going to pave roads not a block at a time. Generally speaking, you're going to do 3, 4, 5 blocks depending on where they go and where the traffic is, kind of a thing. So
I think the only thing, I like the idea of maybe using excess surplus funds from other enterprise funds. The only thing, you do have you do have another countervailing opinion or public opinion where, you know, Prop 5 was passed a few years ago in Kaysville, and some citizens also talk about maybe restricting other funds. And also there's a bill in the legislature right now that would do that on a statewide basis, that would make it, you know, illegal for any city to transfer funds. I think the ULCT is working on that, but that's, you know, that's a possibility that funding source could be curtailed.
Maybe I can help you understand this a little more clearly, and maybe Nick could chime in and help understand. So what we're saying, Councilmember Garn, is that if you have a water line project, let's use Market Borough, for example. I'll try and make this as basic as possible. And you're going to go in there and you're going to excavate out those trenches. So you're actually having to take money from that water fund and pay to saw cut and excavate out those trenches, okay? So if you're able to take that and you say, okay, well, actually, this whole road, let's say Market Borough is at the complete RSL stage and degraded and gone. So we say we need a water line, we need to reconstruct, and there's, let's just theoretically say there's 30% of it that needs curb and gutter and some stormwater control. So you look at that as a whole picture, and you say, okay, I know the law says boom, 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 but I've got to go in here and I've got to spend $35,000 out of the water fund that really is kind of a road fund deal. So if I save that $35,000 on a $300,000 water project, okay, then I'm going to take that $35,000 that I would have spent out of the water fund, and we can just apply that to the road resurface. Find me a lawmaker who argues with that, and I'll debate with him all day long, gladly over it.
That makes sense to me.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the final 3 pages of the little handout that I gave you goes over the various options for funding. So option 1 is existing revenue, and what I've done is these projects on the project list, I've kind of divvied them out as what could potentially be done. And another thing to mention is these cost estimates are very, very rough. So, you know, when these projects are done, if it comes in lower or higher, don't get the pitchfork out just yet.
Hey, Josh, sorry. Could you mention, while you're talking about those 3 options, which is awesome, by the way, could you mention what other projects or annual maintenance would need to take place that uses these funds as well?
Yeah.
Throughout the year?
Nick talked about crack sealing. That's something that we're doing every summer. It's tough in hot summer months. We're able to operate till about noon. Then it gets a little too hot, the mixture that we're placing on the road. So crack sealing, as we prepare to do a preventative maintenance treatment like a slurry seal or chip seal, we're also going to go in and we're going to crack seal as well before we do that. We're going to fix alligator cracking, fatigued areas. So you've got to kind of smooth out that surface, get everything at least looking functional and structurally sound. And then we can go in and do the preventative treatment, slurry and chip are the 2 primary ones that we've been doing. But listening to Nick talk, there's other options that are very intriguing. So typically, I think the city has been spending about $100,000 to $150,000 a year on those preventative treatments. With this information from LTAP and from what Nick and Matt are sharing with us, I think that needs to be increased. Whether it's bonding, whatever we do, as soon as we can get in front of some of the problems and try and maintain good roads, that needs to be the focus of what we're doing.
So if that's $200,000 or $300,000, I just wanted to make sure that that was not taken into account in the 3 pages you're referring to, right?
Right, yeah, so there are some chip seal projects on these pages.
Okay. I guess what I'm getting at is there additional need for this money to be spent elsewhere besides the list of expenditures?
There are, these project lists are the more immediate needs that we've identified as a department. You know, LTAP went through, looked at every single road, and every single road almost needs some attention. We have taken their information as well as our own observations and going out and plowing or working on streets, and we have come up with these as the immediate needs. Probably can't be done in a single year, or definitely can't be done in a single year, but there are other places that need attention. As this goes out to the public, I don't want people thinking, well, you know, my road isn't on this list. That doesn't mean that it's not needing attention at some point.
Well, in fact, didn't the LTAP report also suggest, and I may get this wrong, but in the recommendation section, that maybe all B and C road funds be, or maybe not all, but a more significant portion of those ongoing funds be used for maintenance, and that and then the additional costs of, I don't know if you'd call them sunk costs, but because it included personnel also, but your capital costs or reconstruction costs be funded in some other way, so that you're at least making sure that to the extent that you need to do maintenance to reduce costs in the long run, you're using as much of those B and C road funds that will be continuing on maintenance, and then for your bigger projects, you're using some other funding source. Did I get that right? Okay.
Sorry. So back to Shane's question, and I don't know if I'm quite answering your question, but yeah, there are additional projects that even could be more important than these ones. Maybe there's something that we're not seeing. Excuse me. So the other projects could exist. These are more so, as the footnote says, intended to help compare apples to apples.
I just wanted to be clear that this doesn't include, you know, you're kind of marking out all the revenue that we have available in Class C in the revenue area, and then you're talking about some expenditures, but I just wanted to make sure that the council knew that there are additional expenditures that would be required on an ongoing basis throughout the year. Small road repairs,
Yeah. So
crack sealing, those kinds of things.
Crack sealing or cold patching is currently coming from C Road money.
Yeah, so-
Sorry. I didn't-
Routine maintenance.
Yeah.
Routine maintenance.
Yeah, routine maintenance, preventative maintenance, rehabilitation, and reconstruction, right now in Kaysville City are 100% coming from C Road money. And the other source, is that the local active transportation? Yeah, can you explain that a little bit more to me?
I was just going to make a comment about that because I did notice that we show that as obligated for roads, at least in this analysis. Back when it was presented publicly, one of the things that probably bothered me about some of the public campaign is the commercials showed big holes in roads and said, you want to fix this? And, you know, vote for the 1/4%. And, you know, I had a few people that I know that when that passed said, great, you know, now we've got all the funds we need to fix our roads. And you look at the $250,000 that we're estimating as, you know, compared to the 3 or 10 or 12, when you look at your entire list, it's not very much. But there was also another portion of that was advertised as as an active transportation component. So you can use it for your roads, but it's not restricted the same way B&C sees it, so that you can actually use it for trails or other types of active transportation. And I don't know that we have anyone really clamoring saying, hey, no, don't do that. But there may be a certain level of public expectation that a portion of that 1/4% increase would go to funding trails and other types of active transportation. It doesn't mean we have to,
Okay.
but where B&C says that we can't, it has to be used for roads, the local active transportation portion gives us the flexibility. We can still use it for roads, but we're not restricted to just roads on that portion.
And I think that was the intent early on, that some of it would be used for those purposes, but currently there's no guidance on restrictions or anything, so I think that's why Josh has plugged in the full amount.
All right.
For the next several years.
That is the most that's what we get annually,
That's our
more or
estimate.
less.
But point being, you know, this 963, if the council said we want to take some of that C Road fund and put it into a trail system, not allowed. If they wanted to take half of the estimated local, the 150,000 and put it into a trail system, it is allowed. I think that's kind of the difference.
I'll arm wrestle Cole for it.
Yeah, I think, given the current status of our condition, yeah, if we took, you know, $1 and put it on an auxiliary project that could have gone to a primary project, oof, you know, I think the roads need everything they can get.
I actually agree with that. I think the roads need everything they can get as well. You do just have that that a little bit of expectation. You may have some that say, yeah, well, I voted for that because I thought, you know,
Right.
you have some that voted for it because they saw the commercial with the potholes and thought that's going away, which is unrealistic.
At the
And
risk
you
of-
also had those who saw it who, you know, showed someone running freely on new trails that just magically appeared and voted for it for that reason too.
At the risk of being a little contrarian on that, though, I think it may be situational. So in other words, if there was like an access trail to a new subdivision or something like that that had to go along an existing road, maybe in a certain situation, maybe not, but maybe in a certain situation, it's nice to have the flexibility. I'm not saying do that, but.
And the idea was that the local governing body makes that determination. So it's totally within the council's realm to say, we're going to use that additional funding for roads.
Josh is going to plan on it until he hears otherwise.
I got a bullet for you, Josh, when you go have that arm wrestle. And so I need correction on this or education if I'm wrong, but that money's coming basically from vehicles, from gas tax. And, you know, it was proposed to me this week from a longtime guy who's been around here, former mayor, not of our city, but he says, you know, these guys don't pay any taxes. We'd love to provide them the world, but, you know, the cars kind of need their roadways first, and then tackle some of that auxiliary stuff. But there's a bullet you deliver cold.
I won't argue. My wife would argue, but
It's tough.
I am inclined not to.
When we're blowing struts and tires and bending wheels, it's
Yeah, my wife,
too far gone.
as we were plowing snow, she got a flat tire in a pothole in Farmington, and it you know, talking to some of their road crews, you know, things are tough everywhere right now.
There's
But,
no potholes in Farmington. That's not what I was told.
I'm glad you said Farmington.
Gold potholes? I didn't-
yeah, anyway, so.
Imagine that.
I
Yeah,
can't-
you know,
I
it's
can't imagine.
tough everywhere. I think, you know, some places are better or worse than others, but it's a universal problem that everybody's dealing with to some extent. But, yeah, please.
I was just going to say, I think I appreciate the fact that, I mean, I think that's a part of that's a perception problem. You know, everybody sees a pothole, and yes, there are terrible, and this winter has been particularly bad that way. It's been particularly bad along the entire Wasatch Front. But what I appreciate about the LTAP is that you know, an objective numbers-based analysis of that represents that Kaysville's roads are not terrible, and we have a very, very small portion that are at the 0 stage. And I mean, we're getting down to that road. I mean, so they could be very bad in a couple of years, but they're not. You know, we're not back to driving on cobblestone streets, and
We as a
we're not in the
department,
18th century.
Yeah, sorry. We as a department recognize and we appreciate the residents and the general public that it's a struggle and it's a financial burden. You know, I'm waking my kid up as I'm driving down the road because it's bumpy. That's a real burden. That is a very, very real burden. But yeah, things aren't perfect, but I'm really proud of the employees in the Public Works Department because they're operating with, you know, according to LTAP's numbers, less than half of what they probably should be operating with, but we're 0.5 of a point away from what they'd like to see as the average RSL. So, yeah, I mean, things are bad in some places, but you know, it's not the end of the world. And I don't mean that to kind of discount people's experiences and what they're struggling with. We recognize that very much. So, but also want to pat these guys on the back a little bit.
Dean, can you remind us, a couple of years ago, the city did do a short-term bond for some road improvements in the south end of town. What was the term of that? I hear Nick from LTAP tell us that, you know, it's probably not always the best way to go, but I also remember that being a relatively short term for that very reason, that we weren't bonding for something that appreciates so quickly that by the time we pay it off, it's time to completely replace it.
In 2010, we issued an excise tax revenue bond.
We talking to the
In
microphones?
the amount of $1.4 million, and it was a 5-year term.
And it's paid off, right? So
Paid off in 2015.
And so the payment on that was, if I recall, a couple
Under 300,000.
300,000 a year that came out of the B and C funds. Do you recall what the rate was on that?
2.79.
2.79%. Just
Wow.
the reason why
To the
I,
100th of a percent.
He's either making that up or he's
Tell you
dead.
exactly.
the reason why I asked that question, your original list that I know you said wasn't a ranking order,
It is and it isn't.
but I still kept it, and I know you never do math.
Same list that's on here.
Never do math in public, but, you know, I went down, all the way down to including Sunset Drive, because as I drove them, those were probably, if the top issues or the top concerns, at least that I saw. And, you know, if you were to try and do that, it'd be awfully expensive to try and do that in one fell swoop, but it looked like it was about $4.2 million. I was trying to imagine what that might look like if, and I did a 4-year amortization at a 4% rate, and it looked like it would take doing something like that, doing this all in one jump would take almost the entire 1.2. Again, if my math is right, I did it 4% in just over 4 years with the interest, would be pretty significant. But I know we're looking for guidance from the council. It would almost be nice to say, maybe to get some guidance of, would you like to see us get a big portion of this done initially, so at least we're caught up? In a perfect world, we've got a formula. We have the intern that comes every other year, updates and goes into a magic formula that says to keep on this projection, you need to make sure you have this amount every single year, and then it just becomes an operational part of the budget. The problem is then when we have other needs that come up, like additional firefighters or something like that, then usually we get, where can you cut, where can you hold, where do you not have to spend, and holding true to that plan. And it's not just a Kaysville problem or a city problem, it's a problem everywhere. It's a problem with every governmental organization, including UDOT, I think, as far as saying we need to prioritize, or we have this road that came up with this mudslide. That would be the perfect scenario, is that we just have it worked into a formula, and every year we know to keep on track with our every 7 to 9 years on a slurry seal, this is exactly what it's going to cost, and just budget accordingly. But my initial thought was just that to narrow that gap, to get us so that we're at least back on schedule, that would be a pretty significant amount. But I just wonder what that would look like, or if we should ask staff to say, maybe give us a small, medium, and large, and maybe extra large and extra large in case we go with the large, then it doesn't feel like.
Mayor, I think if you look at that next sheet that Josh has prepared.
Yeah, he's kind of done
Includes a
that,
bonding
sort
option.
of.
Just a sample of it.
Gotcha. Sorry, I probably just could have let you finish.
No,
I
you're
didn't
good,
flip
you're
it
good.
to the next page, but I'm glad to see I was at least
Which
thinking the
sheet
same.
were you referring to, Dean?
That's the second one with the bonding option.
The second,
$2 million.
2 and 3. So option 1, as I said earlier, is continuing with our existing revenue stream. Option 2 is with bonding. That's got 2 million in there. That's not like a set in stone number. And option 3 is bonding plus additional revenue of some sort. So as you're looking at these 3 options, I just found it helpful to see that all of these same number of projects with the same price per project, assuming that there's no inflation over the next 5 years, which isn't realistic, but these projects all spread out over 5 years and spill into fiscal year 23 with the Crestwood project there at the bottom with option 1. Option 2, we're able to finish all these projects in the first part of the fiscal year 22. And option 3, we are done with all the projects, and this includes the debt service from bonding by the first part of fiscal year 21. So taking all those into account, we're doing more upfront. We're getting in front of the problem. And then, as Nick mentioned, we're not having to spend that big dollar figure, that 3.4 million in 2020. That can kind of operate closer to 1.6. Kaysville will grow. We'll have more roads to take care of. So I hope we don't get down to 1.6 at that point, but yeah. I don't know if this addresses quite what you were asking.
The difference between option 2 and option 3, do you understand, is just additional revenue?
Right,
So
there's some additional
option 2
revenue
would
source.
take Class C money to pay the bond, and where option 3 would be keeping
Right.
that Class C money
I
whole.
think what the mayor was potentially saying, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, Mayor, but that the difference between option 2 and option 3 is that the bond amount is equal, or there isn't a difference between that. The difference with option 3 is that there is some additional
Yeah,
funding
like
source,
a
whether that's a
additional
utility or whatever it might be.
Whatever it might be.
Maybe the mayor was indicating, and this is a question I have, so if it's not, then I'll just ask it, but that $2 million, I think maybe, what would it look like if that was 3? Or if that was potentially 4, or something along those lines. So that initial bond amount is a higher amount over the course of 5 years. And then maybe there's, an option 2 where we just have the bond amount, we pay that off. I'm concerned about having just a bond amount. I think Mr. Garn was talking about that it gets you a chunk of money up front that you're paying for over time, and you can kind of get that bubble done. But then we eventually go back to just relying on the B and C road funds and our local active transportation for ongoing maintenance, which means we eventually, as we've already learned, we're going to lose additional spending power with that, with relying on that. So I think we've probably really seriously need to consider some additional source of funding. And I like the idea of I mean, it's not a popular idea, I know, in some circles, but the idea of the utility, of a street utility, I'm not sure, Nick, what Provo City found as far as what, each homeowner, would be assessed on a monthly basis for their utility. You said something like $3.
About $3 a month.
$3 a month for a street maintenance fee. I'm not sure what that translated into for a grocery store, or for a church building, or for a school. What I like about the utility is that those non-taxable entities also contribute, that also have an impact on the streets, schools and whatnot. So there is some additional revenue source that keeps the homeowner's portion, that spreads it out across the city more. I think we should seriously consider that because again, if we don't do that, we're relying back on C-Road.
I think a good example.
We have to have something extra.
Yeah, sorry.
That's okay.
I think I was a senior in high school, 2002 or 2001. I think the city, if I'm not mistaken, the city bonded at that point to do a lot of roads. Sunset Drive was one of those. And it seems like they got out in front quite a bit in a lot of places, but then they just went back to the same revenue stream, and things slowly get away from you.
That's right.
It's probably a combination of both because of how far behind we are, and I'm not saying that how far, but I don't know where the tone went earlier, that it's not the Public Works' fault that it's far behind. If the Public Works had $4 million a year, we would have awesome brand new roads every year.
Paved in gold.
I don't think there's fault. We just are where we are.
Yeah.
So probably a hybrid of both. I think we're so far behind the 8 ball, and Nick, I'm open to comment, and Matt, if you don't think we are, but you actually, though, if you look at the roads that are pretty close to the RSL stage, it's about 25% that are in those kind of fair to medium stages in his graphs. And so where are we ever going to catch up with that? Another area that potentially could be looked at, which it would have been great if it was looked at 10 years ago before Kaysville had a construction boom, is the road fee in our building permits. When I did a study on it 6 months ago, they were, from going off hip here, about a quarter of what surrounding cities were charging in their building permit fees on the road item. So, and there's no fault in that. It's just perhaps something where our coffers have begun to deplete, and you combat that with inflation, and then we're really up against a huge battle here. Nick, I was wondering if you could pull up that slide again, though, that had that 3-year plan. In 17, it was around $3 million, 2020, and then it had the 2023. No, it had 2017, 2020, and 2023. Nick had a plan laid out in there of...
Is that what you had in mind?
No. And if it's roughly in 2017, the plans show that if we spend around $3 million, and then in 2020, it was somewhere around that $3.5 million. And then by 2023, we were back down to about 1.3 million.
Yeah.
Does that sound about right, Nick?
Yep.
I think you know the slide I'm talking about. So I think, looking at this from, a little bit of background in here, I just think that we got to bring them up to snuff, and there's quite a few of them out there that are going to need that. So, I mean, the other question I would have is maybe a little more staff-oriented. There's 3 bonds that I'm aware of. Maybe you could help us understand. So there was a fire station bond, and that one's paid off and done, I believe, right? And then there's the 1.4 million 2010 bond, and that's paid off in 2015. So not to be rhetorical. And then we have a bond currently out there right now for the police station, right? What's roughly the police station's payoff date? How many years are we still out on?
It was a 17-year bond.
Okay, so that's kind of moot in this
Debt service is
conversation.
about $425,000 per year.
Okay, so the other two have been paid off, and, you know, are those revenue streams that we had to boost to get those bonds still coming in to the city?
Well, they were paid off through an excise tax, which was C-Road monies. So you used C-Road monies to make the debt service payment, which is less than the amount that you had available for C-Road projects.
For annual
during
C-Road.
that year.
So we've got, as of 2015, so in 2016, you actually saw a boost then of 300 grand. It wasn't going to old road repairs, so that's good, you know, a plus. One other question on those areas. It slipped my mind, but it'll be back. Slipped my mind, it'll come back though. So I'll reround back to it. There's another area.
While
of
you're
money.
thinking, can I ask a question? What, the 425, is that, you know, I don't do math in public either, but that doesn't add up to 2 million
You
in my.
need you need a fifth year.
So there's
There'd be
fiscal year
another year.
23 would be one more payment, okay. And then you don't have anything in here on fiscal year 22. I guess I'm on option 3, which is the most exciting option. Is just,
That just means that your money.
we're done with the projects that we've talked about today,
that
even
money
though
will
go to other things.
accounts
We'll have
that
lots of other needs,
we
okay,
spent on
all right.
those.
Can I just ask one of the 750 estimate for Sunset? It looked like it was, again, math in public, but on the option 2, it had 122 in fiscal year 19 and 327 in fiscal year 20 and nothing.
That's just me trying to zero out the budget each year, and that's carrying over.
Okay,
to the next
so it doesn't necessarily take care of all of Sunset. I just, okay. And then I guess maybe even as an option 4 that I would be interested in, because again, as I drove that, you're talking a fiscal year on option 3 of 3.475, but it's punting Sunset to next year. I guess I would be curious what that looks like to move it to current year. Of course, that increases the bond, but what that does long-term, again, that's more of a get it all done. But as I drove, the road Sunset seemed pretty significant to me. I might be interested, I don't know if the council be interested, but in maybe have option 4 that moves that fiscal year 19 Sunset to 18 and how it affects it in the long run.
We're totally open to shifting things around. This is very much just preliminary. In transparency, I live on Sunset Drive, so that they're.
So that'll be the last one done, right?
I don't want to say I'm hesitant to do my job, but I also don't want it to appear as though, gosh, new public works director comes in and look what it's done.
Oh, you're barking for a demotion then, man, and then when Sunset's done, you can have it back. We'll trade you out with your assistant.
Or just have the Belknaps donate $2 million, and we'll do a Sunset / Belknap app.
Belknap Drive.
Belknap Boulevard.
If I could just very briefly agree, because I've done a fair amount of talking here in this meeting, but I agree with you, Councilman Snell, and also Councilman Adams on your approach and where you're headed, and also the mayor, and all the comments that have been made. I think, you know, we don't want to be penny wise and pound foolish, because having seen this report, I just think we have to do what in the long run is going to cost the least and still have functional roads and have a maintenance plan in place. I love the new software, but you know, the ability to inventory everything, keep track of it. I don't want to belabor that too much, but this is great work, and thank you very much, the LTAP people. But I wanted to point out one other thing that's just very, for an accountant, this is amazing I would even think this, you know, but it's sort of a big picture thought, and that is, and I could be wrong, tell me if I'm wrong, but I've been here in the city now for 30 years, and if roads typically last 20 years, how many of those roads, and granted some of the older, you know, the arterial, the major collectors have been there probably for all that period of time, but if you look at how many new roads there are in Kaysville, Because I sort of wondered, well, how were we able to do it with B and C road funds in the past? But if you look at since 2000, think of how much construction there's been in Kaysville, and then think about how much the costs have increased and the revenues stayed the same, then to just emphasize the point that you folks have already made, you know, we don't have the additional revenue. I think for future generations, we have to make the political courageous step and then do the elbow grease of explaining it to people in the community why we need a new revenue source in order to maintain our roads. Because all of those roads that have been built that are still within that 20-year window, guess what? They're going to reach end of life. And now we're getting close to build out. We've never had this many roads in Kaysville before. And the impact fees have paid for them the first time, but now they have to be maintained. And so I just wanted to emphasize that point. That's why we haven't had, in the past, we haven't had as much of a need as we do now, because much of our city is new.
I don't know the impact fees have paid for them, not a source of argument, but I don't know that they have. Maybe that's another area. As you know, we're talking about fees, implementing a fee. We probably really need to look at that. I know it's been talked about. You know, I've seen it in emails and whatnot, but yeah, I think we should do a study how we are in relation to other cities on the road line item for a building permit. It's on my list here. I remembered it back. So the Flint Street. Keep in mind, I understand that money, you know, here, and here is in these different boxes, right? But the Flint Street, didn't we make the last payment on the Flint Street property? Or we're close to?
It was paid this year.
Yeah, and that's several $100,000. So, you know,
That's paid through the RDA.
RDA, right? Yeah.
Through a loan from the general fund until tax increment starts coming in to pay that loan.
So the general fund was not, bleeding is not the right word, but it was bearing the cost of that. And general funds are open to whatever we generally need, correct? So that payment now, what was it, 375? 320 a year or something like that. So there's $320,000 that we've been kind of living without.
But keep in mind, to make that payment, that loan, you're dipping into reserves. You're not taking it from existing revenue stream. You're taking it from fund balance to make that loan to the RDA. That makes sense?
Explain it a little deeper.
So the RDA makes the payment for the property. In order to make that payment, they've borrowed money from the general fund balance.
Mm-hmm.
The savings, I call it
Savings.
fund
Yeah,
balance
like
and savings.
accrued rollover or whatever.
So not existing revenue money that's coming in, it's from fund balance. And then as the RDA collects tax increment over the next 15 years, that increment will be used to pay back the general fund, to bring the reserves back up.
Yeah, in my out-of-the-box ways of thinking, if we've been living without that $350,000, you know, from the general fund, because it's been going to pay off a real estate deal, you know, perhaps we could continue to live without it for a little while and allocate some of that over, like, you know, the 2017 to 2020 bracket that he had presented. You know, there's $975,000 if the general fund could continue to live without that for 3 more years. You know, that could be applied and keep the bonding down and the fee down, and like Chris was saying, help us get ahead, and also, you know,
You can always use general fund.
Yeah,
monies.
we have additional reserves that, besides that 300,000, as long as we
we've
stay
had
within
rollover
5%
even
and
without being
25%, yeah. We-
As long as you maintain
For
it
1 and
by-
2, 3-year time periods, that would be something we could do, and
off the cuff.
knowing we would be exhausting those savings and needing to pay for them later, but for short-term projects, that's essentially what they're there for.
If they're not needed right now. So off the cuff, what's a rough hip shot you think that's been accruing
Well,
in
if our
savings?
general fund's 13 million and we need to be within 5 and 25%, are we 25 or
think our-
20?
I think our fund balance last fiscal year
4?
was 2.1,
Okay.
something like that.
It rolled over with the 325,000. So
But keep in mind,
2.4
you have
million.
to- Like Shane says, you have to keep within those thresholds.
We can't go below 5% of our
Can't go
general
5%.
fund, so we'd have
Of
to
your,
stay.
of your annual
Of your-
budget of it
exactly.
in reserves.
And I wouldn't
Exactly.
recommend going below 12%.
I was thinking cut it in half, which would be 12%, which would be about 1.2 million that the general fund might be able to bear to move over to these guys for a while. Because I've even heard several people who, want those auxiliary projects. And this is a 4-letter word, give or take what your viewpoint is, but like a pool. And they've said, hey, no, if you'll fix the roads, we'd take that over a pool any day. So I just, if there is that ability to use some general fund, if we can continue to kind of live within our means and live economically to the best that we can, I think at that point, we're showing the citizens, okay, we have 1.2 of C road money. And yes, we do need some of that C road money to make sure that potholes and crack sealing is also performed. And we're going to do that to the best of our ability. But boy, when we start to eliminate some of our massive drains on the C road funds, which are these really alligatored out roads, no curb and gutter, no structural integrity to them, boy, I see that C road fund money actually being replenished over time, except for the drain of inflation. So I think there's a lot of creative ways that we can brainstorm, and in the end, if we were able to tell the citizenry, okay, from general fund, we believe that we have, let's call it $1 million, and let's call it $1 million from the C road. There's $2 million. Well, Nick was at about $3 million on his this year plan that he's proposing, and so we are looking for another $1 million. And potentially, if we really crunch numbers, there might be, if we took all the other $250,000 from the gas tax, and if we could squeeze another $250,000 out of the general, $3.5 million.
And that, I'm sorry, Councilman. I just say, and that works especially for the short term, but then fast forward to the next year when we need another $3.5 million. Now we've spent half of our savings account, now we've exhausted the options, and that's where the revenue part comes in, because if we're gonna say we have 1.2 that we have available, but we really need 3 now and 3 next year, and then drops to 2 and then drops to 1.6, we still, if we exhaust all of our savings for year 1, or even cut it in half or whatever it is, which has its own potential repercussions. We still have year 2 and year 3 that we say, okay, well now how are we gonna do that? We'd be living just off savings. We need to find some kind of a medium. So even if you were to do a combination of that we don't just exhaust our opportunities for year 1 and then have nothing else.
Right, but we'd still have about 1.2, 1.3, somewhere in that million on the 12% you're talking about, and 5% is legal, right? And that's obviously rainy day, don't ever go below that. So we still have a buffer of 7% that we would be leaving, above the law. And then, Nick, correct me if I'm wrong, on that slide we were looking for, so 2017 talked about 3 million that we need now, right? Yeah, you've got it there, Andy? And even.
Is this the one you're talking about? We can go through this real quick.
It's not that one. Go.
That does have the 2.9 million on it.
There was one that had it really.
This one?
There you go. Maybe
there you go.
that's it.
Right there. So in 2017, Nick, Nick and Matt, you guys are proposing 3 million. And I see the beauty in your plan. You're saying, hey, we have studied the daylights out of your roads, and if you guys will follow this rhythm right here, you're looking at a 10-year plan that has a light at the end of the tunnel. Right. So if we had $3 million in 2017, and that's kind of, and sorry, council, if maybe my gearing is looking at this, and so I'm not saying let's deplete and bleed out the savings, but let's use those savings so that we aren't having to spend, if there's 1.2, 1.3 million, whatever, that we might be able to use out of the general fund, and then, there's 300,000 from the Flint Street payment, whatever those monies may be. As we look at them, those monies are actually, they're money we're not paying interest on with a bond, and they're money that maybe we're just sitting there going, well, let's just have 4 times the legal amount we need on the rainy day fund. Well, let's use those, because I think that's maximizing our dollar. But that's a 3-year window between each bracket. Actually, it's a 4-year window on the last bracket. So 2017 to 2020, Nick's saying, hey, if you guys spend, and correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, are you telling us if we spend $3 million this year, and then in 2020, but think about it, then in 18, 19, we're actually still have, we could start building more reserves again in the general fund. The C Road fund isn't being completely dumped into what they're proposing. And then 2020, okay, we need $3.5 million delivered over to your department. And then 4 years later, look how far back down we are. We're pretty close to the 1.25 million in your C road that you already have access to. Granted, if 25% of that C road was needed just for general maintenance, you'd have around 900 grand or whatever. But that plan to me is beautiful, and I think there's some areas where taxpayers could go, yeah, hey, well, we're not going to bond, you're not going to raise our taxes. Or if you're saying, you know, you've come up with 2.5 million, and Nick says you need 2.945 million, and that's going to really put a bang into our roads. Hey, yeah, $500,000 bond, we can get behind that. So anyway,
Is that one time 2.9? Are you saying 2.9 for 17, for 18, 19? So
Yeah,
it's really
for a
12
3-year
million.
window.
3 phases.
Those are 3-year increments, so that'd be each year.
So between now and 2020, we're talking about 12 million, not 3 million.
Oh, that's per year.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
If I could just very briefly address your Council Member Adams' comments, and I agree that if you could use some of the general fund on a temporary basis for however long, that might be reduce the amount of the bond. But I think to the mayor's point, the numbers just don't work unless you have some long-term increase in revenue, because even when you get to not only do you have to pay back the 3 years of 2.9 million and the 3 years of 3.4 million, you've got to pay that back with an excess, but you don't have an excess, because even when you get to the end of that road and you've got your 1.6 million, you're still only bringing in, let's say there's a little inflation even, you're bringing in 1.4, you're still losing 200,000 a year, and you have no ability to pay back either the loan that you took from the general fund or a bond. So somewhere in there, I think you have to consider additional revenue, and that's just the reality of it.
Oh, yeah, definitely. The hybrid idea of, right? Look at the building permits, see if there's a drain there, if they need to be corrected to market value. And then, yeah, obviously what Nick is saying about the fee money. But I guess even for year one, and forgive me for my misunderstanding there, but for year one, if there are some monies that aren't needed in other areas that are available to use, I think, we get behind them. And then that gives us a year to really plan for bonding, evaluate building permit fees, and evaluate the idea of having a utility fee for roads.
Mayor, I feel like you've done a good job of giving us what we need, in that I'd like to have an opportunity to sit down with Dean and Cammie and Josh, and I'm hearing an amenability to some bonding, or at least some discussions that way. I think we'll do what Councilman Adams suggested, and propose some fund balance, whatever the council deems appropriate there, and just go at all these different ways to scrap together as much as we can, and especially over the next couple of years, and we'll propose that as part of the FY18 budget coming up here pretty soon. So those first meetings we'll have that put together, and I don't want to necessarily say that we have to end this meeting, but we appreciate this discussion. This is exactly what we needed, the staff needed for direction, and many props to Josh, and of course to Nick and Matt on their report too, because this culminated really well into, and Josh, I really like what you did here, because this is exactly what I asked you to do, these options. I think that really sends a message when you look at option 3 and see what we can accomplish in 1 or 2 years is really quite exciting. So I appreciate that.
Can I just make sure I clarify? Because my understanding is we've talked about bonding, but we're not talking about general obligation bond, a ballot initiative that people would vote on, nor are we talking about a bond necessarily. It'd be a different type of a bond mechanism, like the revenue bond, say with the police station. But I guess we could tie a tax increase to that, but the intent, at least from my perspective, would be we would pay the debt service on that 5-year bond through C-Road funds. So there would not be a tax increase associated to the public associated with those bonds.
That's what I heard too, except I also heard that there might be some amenability to further additional revenue, which I would interpret as maybe a road fee.
Yes.
And I'd like to look into that. There's 7 or 8 cities that have done that in the state.
Right, and again, I don't think that works, because your C-Road funds aren't even as much as once you've done your maintenance year. So something, you know, unless there's something else I'm not seeing here, you don't have enough just with C Road funds to even service the debt. You'd have to have some additional revenue.
Yeah, that's true.
And a road fee, I mean, I don't know what the feedback has been. I recall a city trying to implement a police fee, and that was not received very well. And there's a lot of argument publicly that goes to both the use of enterprise funds and the implementation of fees because it circumvents the truth in taxation process. And there's a lot of, let me rephrase that, there's a lot of perception that can circumvent, and that it may be a very, very valid argument. And I'd be interested to know what that looks like, because again, don't do math in public, but I took $3 a month times 12 months out of the year and times it by our 8,000 or so, 9,000.
9,000.
It's not very much money. It certainly doesn't solve that problem.
He got us to that $250,000 mark that he used in his report.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
yeah. Doesn't get us to the 420 or whatever the bond amount was. So
So that's something else to.
I think better than $3 is $6.
And then also maybe just as staff is thinking about that, there are two instances. We had the bond for the southern portion of the city, the 1.2 that we did over 5 years. But prior to that, we also had the $3 million that was the city's participation for the construction of the new overpass that we essentially financed through UDOT and paid them annual payments for 5 years of.
3 anyway.
It was $400,000 or $500,000, and I'm not saying that those two big strains on our B and C road are the reason we're behind, but we're talking about a 7-8 year period when we had a third of our C road funding going to debt service, and you know,
Actually, it was impact fee money for
that we did use for the payment. That's right. Okay.
Road impact fee.
That's right, because it was new construction. And to that point too, and then I'll stop, but impact fees with building permits aren't even something that we can just say, hey, what does Layton charge and what does Farmington charge? Let's have ours be comparable to theirs. We actually have a schedule to say, we have to build these new facilities, and in order to build those, it's gonna cost us this much. And so we take that amount, we divide it into new construction, and that's what we charge. And it has to be, and so that is an option to look at impact fees, but it still has to be based on our needs. We took the overpass out of that calculation, so our transportation fee, because it's built, now we can't be charging people for their participation in the overpass because it's constructed. But the impact fees have a formula that we have to, and we can review our capital facilities plan again, I suppose, if needed. But
They can be used for like a Sunset Drive though, for like a reconstruct.
it can't be.
Get it
I
out
don't think
full to the
impact
full
fees
right
can
of
be.
way, curb gutter.
I don't know. It's a good question. It's capacity. It's increased capacity.
Right.
It
So,
has to be scheduled on your impact
and it
fee,
has to be on your plan.
on your plan, and it has to be for capacity improvement.
So get it on your plan, Josh.
There probably is some,
This might get scary. We might be twice as what Layton's road fees are if we
And
go
we-
off of our needs.
And we've dropped, I was gonna say, and we've dropped, I think.
Builders will still come though, I'm not worried. Don't worry about it.
All right, well, Josh, Matt, Nick, thank you for being here. Wonderful presentation. Great, it's great to have this kind of factual data to help us give some good guidance, so we appreciate your participation. We'll stand this meeting adjourned and convene the city council at 7 p.m.
Thanks, Josh.
or in recess
Nick, good
until.
man.
Thank you.
Thank you, council.